Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on designing better spreadsheets in Excel. I've done a couple of sound checks leading up to this webinar in the last half an hour, so I feel fairly confident that everybody can hear me okay, so I know that I'm not speaking into a black hole. And what a lovely webinar to end 2018 on. This is our last webinar of the year, I think. Yes, because next week is Christmas, so we won't be back with you until I think it's the week commencing January. I think January the 9th might be our first webinar back, and that one is on PowerPoint if my memory serves me correct. So you're going to have a little bit of a break. I hope you've all done your Christmas shopping. Have you done your Christmas shopping yet? Type into the chat panel, let me know, because I haven't done my Christmas shopping and I feel extremely guilty. I'm going to have to do everything this weekend, which isn't good at all. People are putting somewhat. I'm glad that a lot of you haven't done your Christmas shopping either. Makes me feel a little bit better. All right, without further ado, let's get on to what we're going to be covering today. So I will introduce myself first of all. I know we do have a lot of our regulars, but we always have a few new people as well. So if you've never attended one of my webinars before, my name's Deborah Ashby and I am an IT trainer and subject matter expert for Microsoft products. And I work for Filtered and Excel with Business. I've been a trainer for a very long time now. In fact, I need to update this slide because it is slightly out of date. So I've been in the IT industry for about 24 years now. I've just had a birthday, which is a bit scary. And I've been in IT training specifically for about sort of 10, 11 years. Hopefully that qualifies me to sit in front of you today. And we are going to be running through a whole host of things today in relation to designing better spreadsheets. So let's just get straight into it, shall we? I think the most important question to ask first of all is, why is it important to think about the design of our spreadsheets? Now, I think if you're anything like me, if you're given a task, or maybe you've been sent a spreadsheet and you need to work on that, or maybe you need to create a spreadsheet from scratch, you just kind of tend to dive into it, start entering your data or importing data or whatever it is you need to do without really giving too much thought to the structure of your spreadsheet, the layout, how useful it's going to be, how easy it's going to be for other people to understand your spreadsheet. So I know for a fact that I create a spreadsheet and I really just create it with myself in mind. I create it how I'm going to best understand it. You know, and then if I have to share it with others, it might not be so understandable for them. So these are all things that we need to think about. So it's really just making sure that we design our spreadsheets to make them super easy for us to update in the future and easy for other people to understand as well. And also maintaining the integrity of our spreadsheets and making sure it's as error-free as possible. So these are things which you really need to consider before you create a spreadsheet. And it is a little bit, or it makes the process a little bit longer, but you'll find in the long run, if your spreadsheet is really efficient to use, then that's going to be useful to you further down the track. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why it is important, or some of the things you should be considering when you are creating a spreadsheet in Excel. The first thing is structure, and we are going to look at some practical examples of this after these slides. So it's really important when you're doing a spreadsheet to know who your audience is. So as I mentioned, if you're just designing it for yourself, then you may be designing it in a way that maybe only you understand. If that spreadsheet is going to be shared with your colleagues, or maybe it's going to go to clients, you really need to think about things like, you know, how are they going to be looking at this spreadsheet? What is their skill level? So it might be that you're very good at Excel, and I'm sure you all are, and you create your spreadsheet with these tremendously complex formulas, and then maybe you send it to a client who maybe has very limited knowledge of Excel. That's going to be hard for them to understand your spreadsheet, to look at those calculations and work out what you've done. So really think about keeping things really simple, and think about who that spreadsheet is going to be seen by and what their skill level is. Another thing you should be considering is the accuracy. So it's really important to maintain the integrity of your spreadsheet. And what I mean by that, again, is if you're going to be sharing your spreadsheet with other people, what might happen is that you've spent a long time making this spreadsheet really wonderful, and then you send it to someone and they go in, they start making changes, and before you know it, there's errors in your spreadsheet. you've basically lost the integrity of that spreadsheet. So you want to be trying to build in some controls that help people accurately input information into your spreadsheet. So that might be using utilities in Excel, such as data validation, which we're going to take a look at. Also things like protecting cells, so making sure that people can only edit certain parts of your spreadsheet. All of these things will help maintain the integrity of your spreadsheet, and also means less work for you, because if somebody messes it up, then you're probably going to have to be the one who fixes it all up again. Okay. Also make sure that any formulas that you have in your spreadsheet are correct in the first instance, and also auditable, so they should be easy for people to read. So have you ever gotten, this has happened to me so many times, because I train Excel, but I don't claim to be a super expert in it. You know I have lots of friends who are accountants who are in Excel doing complex things every single day, and they do formulas and I just look at them and think, wow. It's as long as my arm, which is great if you understand formulas, but you want to make sure that you're keeping them as simple as possible so that everybody with a basic level knowledge of Excel can understand those formulas. Another thing is flexibility. So you want to design it for longevity. So any spreadsheet you design should be adaptable to change. We know that spreadsheets aren't static entities. So I might create a spreadsheet today, maybe it's sales figures, and that spreadsheet's going to change. So each month there might be new sales figures that I'm adding in. So I need to make sure that I design a spreadsheet that can cope with that, that makes it easy. So when I do add in new data, if I've got maybe pivot tables or charts coming off of that data, I don't want to make it difficult for myself by, when I do add new data, having to go in and manually update every single thing which comes off of that data. I want to be able to do that extremely quickly. And for that, I'm going to show you how you use tables, which is going to just make your life a whole lot easier and make everything super easy to update. So think about the flexibility. Another thing I would say is to avoid hard coding values. And if you're not sure what I mean by that, again, I will show you that in an example. But what I mean is, don't hard code values into cells. Always try and use cell references wherever possible. So if you are doing a formula, so maybe you want to do, I don't know, cell A2 multiplied by 200. Instead of typing in 200, just use the cell reference, put 200 in the cell and use that cell reference, so that it's very easy for you to change. You just change the number in the cell, and because you're referencing the cell as opposed to the hard-coded number, everything's going to update automatically. So think about not hard-coding values in, using cell references to improve your efficiency. And as I mentioned, named ranges and tables are a godsend when it comes to this type of thing. So again, I'm going to show you in a moment some examples, and we're going to use named ranges and tables just to make things super easy. Easy maintenance, or KISS as I like to call it, keep it simple, stupid. I don't know if that's a term that's used globally, but I know in the UK we sometimes say that, keep it simple, stupid. I'm a big fan of keeping everything as simple as possible. So again, macros in spreadsheets, sometimes those seem like a great idea, which they are. However, if this is a spreadsheet which is going to go to other people, if they need to start making changes to macros that you have in there, it might be that they need to have a little bit of knowledge in not only macros, but maybe a little bit of VBA as well, which most people, the majority I would say, do not. So be wary when you're including macros in spreadsheets that you're going to send out to other people. I would also say always use the simplest path to a solution. So again, don't overly complicate your formulas. People tend to, and I think this tends to be just a lack of knowledge as to how to construct a formula in a concise way. There's lots of different ways you can construct formulas, but again, using named ranges will make your formulas a lot easier to understand and a lot shorter as well. Okay, so think about the formulas that you're putting in there. Try and keep them as simple as possible. And another thing we're going to touch on, which is something which I very rarely see people do. And then when someone explained it to me, I was like, that's actually a really good idea. And it's just really documenting everything. So there is no harm if you've created a spreadsheet having a front sheet, what we would call like a welcome sheet, which explains the spreadsheet. So it explains what the different color coding that you have. It explains what you want them to do with this spreadsheet. So again, having that kind of explanation sheet at the beginning is always really helpful when you're sending a spreadsheet out. And finally, user-friendly, design for future you. So as I said, you need to think about who's going to be using your workbook once you've created it, but also include your future self in that. So it might be that you create a spreadsheet today, and maybe you don't look at that spreadsheet again for 6 months. So when you go back to it in 6 months, you want to make sure that you've designed it in such a way that it's really easy for you to sort of pick up from where you left off. You're not having to sit there for an hour trying to work out what you were actually thinking 6 months ago. You've got it all documented and it's really easy for you to understand. Okay, so those are sort of just a brief overview of some of the things that we're going to cover today. How does that sound? We're going to go through, I'm going to throw a whole load of stuff at you today. If you want to type into the chat panel, does that sound okay? Is everyone asleep? I know it is the week before Christmas. Yep, all right, wonderful, amazing. Okay, let's jump out of here. Let's get rid of PowerPoint and get to the good stuff. Right, let's start with this. Okay, now anybody who attends my webinars, I use the same data every week. I think my New Year's resolution is going to be to get some more interesting data, because this is quite boring. I could probably make this data a little bit more interesting, but this is what we've got for today. Now I'm going to start with something which is going to seem so basic and so simple, but you would be amazed how many people don't do this. And we're going to talk about naming things. So if you glance up to the top of my spreadsheet, you can see that it's called exercise file, designing better spreadsheets.xlsx. And this is how I name all of my spreadsheets. I would say it's good to have a consistent naming convention. It makes your life easier when you're looking for your files, and it also makes it easier for people that you're sending files to, if they can see straight away what that file is all about. I've seen some horrendously named files. I used to know a girl who, she worked in accounts, and she would name her invoices 0001, 0002, so on and so forth, with no date or anything. So if she needs to go back and find an invoice, it's going to be virtually impossible to try and work out which one you need. So make sure that you're naming things very simply. As I said, you can see mine, and if I pull up my just my folder here, you can see that for this training session, so you see it's called Designing Better Spreadsheets, the folder, and I have all my files that I use for this session, and I tend to name the first part in capital letters, so I can see it's course outline, exercise file, presentation, and my notes, and then the course that it's attributed to. So it's just really super simple. If anybody goes into my folder, they can see exactly what file they need to grab. So give your files meaningful names is the point I'm trying to get across there. Seems so simple, but as I said, you'd be amazed. The other thing that I would say is naming your tabs as well. Now, I've got a few tabs down here. I'm sure you've got spreadsheets which have many, many, many more tabs, and naming them in a meaningful way, again, will just help anybody who's looking at your spreadsheets understand what's going on that spreadsheet. So very quickly, I'm just going to go through, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to rename just to make these, oops, a little bit easier to understand. I cannot spell today. Come on, there we go. And I'm going to name my sheet 2, right click, we're just going to call this VAT. And then sheet 3 is going to be our, let's say, our raw data. And I've already named my August sales data. So meaningful spreadsheet names. Another thing I also like to do is color code my tabs as well, again, just to make it super clear. So any spreadsheets or worksheets that are kind of related to each other, I like to color code them in exactly the same way. So my raw data is actually related to my August sales data. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to give them both the same kind of color. So let's make them both orange, like so. And again, that just makes it nice and easy to see, okay, yep, those two are related to each other. Hopefully that makes sense so far, nothing too complex there. Now let's take a look. So again, on this spreadsheet, I have some data, and this is, as I said, the information I always use. It's some sales data for 2 fashion stores in Australia. And my data isn't perfect at the moment. I'm not going to go too much into sort of cleaning up data because we have a whole other webinar that we run on cleaning data. We could spend a whole hour just on that. But there are a few things in here which I'm going to want to clean up. And that is another really important thing when it comes to designing your spreadsheets, is making sure the data in there looks good and is ready to use for pivot tables, charts, all of those kinds of things. So currently at the moment, my data isn't so great. I have a few things which I'm probably going to want to change just to make this a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to understand. So you can see I've got a few blank rows in here. So I'm going to highlight my data. And if I do a Control-Shift down, that will take me to the bottom of my, oops. See, if you've got blank rows in, it doesn't allow you to highlight it all the way down, which is a little bit annoying. So let's drag it down manually. I think then I can do Control-Shift down. Yes, okay. So I'm going to highlight my data and I'm just going to pick out those blank rows. So I'm going to go to Home and I'm going to go to Find and Select and go to Special. And you've probably seen me do this before. As I said, I do this in a lot of our sessions. So I'm going to select blanks and click OK. Now I've got a lot of data, so this is probably going to take 20 seconds or so for it to find my blank rows, and it will do a lot of flicking around, as Excel likes to do, and eventually it should give me my blank rows. Either that or it will crash and I will cry, but let's hope it doesn't do that. Talk amongst yourselves. Come on, Excel, you can do it. There we go. So it's highlighted my blank rows, and I can now safely go to my delete button and delete sheet rows just very quickly to get rid of those. A couple of other things I'm going to want to do. I'm just going to want to look at my data and make sure that everything is formatted correctly. And again, it's really important for the readability of your spreadsheet to make sure that it's as error-free as possible and everything has the correct format. So I can see here in column A, where I've got month, I've got some weird looking numbers in here. And I ask this question a lot in my sessions. Does anybody know? I'll ask it to you guys again. Does anybody know why I've got a weird number in there instead of a month? Anybody know what that weird number actually represents? Yes, well done, Rich. You were the first one. So the days since the 1st of the 1st, 1900. That is correct. So in here, because I have this formatted incorrectly, and if you look up in the home ribbon, you'll see it says general. I should have this as date, really. Because it's formatted as general, it's showing me the month as represented by a number. And the way Excel works out this number is it basically counts from the 1st of the 1st, 1900. That's kind of the beginning of the world according to Excel. So we are currently, or this date in here is 42,370 days after the 1st of the 1st, 1900. That is how Excel does its calculation. So I'm going to change that. I'm going to highlight my column A. I'm just going to make sure that it has the correct format. So I'm going to add short date, like so. And that is one thing you want to do. Go through and check to make sure all your data is correct. I might want to add into this sales column a currency symbol just to make sure that that is a little bit easier to read as well. Another thing I would suggest is making sure that your data is grouped together correctly. So what I mean by that is data of the same type should be next to each other. So if you look here, column D, we've got suburb, E, we've got state, then we've got manager in F, postcode and country in G and H. So what I would really want to have is the addressing information should be in columns next to each other. So I have manager kind of stuck in there in the middle, which I'm going to just cut and I'm going to paste it over here instead. All right, so now I have my suburb, state, postcode and country next to each other. All right, so really look at your data and make sure it's sorted in a nice user-friendly way. It's going to make it a lot easier for people looking at your spreadsheet. Lovely. Another thing I would suggest you do is you can see here I've left a few rows at the top. Now, you don't have to do this, but I find what a lot of people tend to do when they're creating a spreadsheet is they tend to start typing their data in cell A1, and away they go, and they type it all in. And then they think, oh, I want to add in a heading at the top, or oh, I want to add in some filters at the top, or maybe they want to add in some slicers or something like that. And they then have to go through and kind of get their data, move it all down. It's a little bit of a pain. So I always tend to leave a few rows at the top in case I decide to put a heading in or anything else up there. All right, so again, that's just another thing just to make your life a little bit easier. Now, one of the biggest things which I love to do with my data, I love tables in Excel. I just think they're so useful. I always put, if I have a data sheet like this one, I will always put it into a table before I do anything else with this data. So I'm actually going to create a pivot table off of this data. But before I do that, I'm going to put it into a table. And you'll find your table options on the home ribbon in the middle here, so where it says format as table. And when I first started learning Excel, I think I've mentioned this previously, is I really didn't think these did anything. I thought it was just like pretty formatting, just to make my table look a little bit nicer, a quick way of applying some nice colors to my data, but they're actually a lot more functional than that. And if you are going to be updating your data, it is so important to put it into a table. So all you need to do is click within your data. You don't need to highlight, although you could. Control A is the shortcut to highlight all of your data. But you don't have to. You can just click within your data, go to Format as Table, and you can choose any one of these, any one you like, it doesn't matter. And you can see it says, where is the data for your table? And you can see the marching ants. Because I'm clicked within the table, it's picked up all the data that's surrounding where I'm clicked. And it's automatically picked up that my table has headers as well, which it does. So that's great. And I can click OK. And it puts my data into a table. Now, if I don't like the way it's formatted, I can go up to my Table Tools contextual ribbon on the Design tab, and I can change my table style, or I can remove the banding from the columns. Whatever I want to do, I can go in and format that. All right, so that is just a nice quick way of putting your data into a table. Then what I would do is I would name this table and get into the habit of naming everything in Excel, okay? And you're going to see why this is so important in a moment. So currently, my table doesn't have a name. If you look up in the top left-hand corner under table name, it just says table 1. So if I want to refer to this table further down the line, table 1 isn't very meaningful. I'm not really going to know what information that table contains. So I'm going to give it a more meaningful name. So I'm going to highlight my data, Control A, and in table name, I'm going to call it TBL underscore sales underscore data, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, really important to hit enter, otherwise that table name won't set. Okay, now again, consistency is really important. So if I'm naming a table, I always start the names TBL. Okay, so I know that that is a table. If I'm naming a pivot chart, maybe I might call it PVT chart, and then what it is. Okay, so I can identify what's a table, what's a chart, what's something else. Just try and get some consistency into your naming conventions. Okay, so my table is now named. I'm happy with that. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a pivot table based off of this data. And again, this isn't a pivot tables training session, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. We do have a lot of pivot tables webinars on our website, which you can listen to if you're interested in that. I'm very quickly just going to create one. So I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to the pivot table option. And when you create a pivot table, you can see it's picked up my table name, TBL sales data, which is correct. And it's saying, where do you want to place the pivot table report? So I'm going to say on a new worksheet. And this is really important when it comes to designing the layout of your spreadsheets. I would never put a pivot table on the same page as my raw data. It's too crowded, it's too complicated. So I would always select new worksheets and click on OK. And you'll see now we've got a sheet 6 that's been created down here. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click and rename it and call it sales pivot, like so. Okay, and also because it's related to my raw data and my August sales data, I'm going to right click and I'm going to make sure it's colored the same as these two. All right, so that everything that relates together is of a consistent color. I can now build my pivot table. And again, don't worry so much if you've never done a pivot table before. I'm just going to put some fields down here so it makes sense. Let's do state in rows. We will do our sales data in values. I'm just going to do that. Keep it very, very simple. Okay, so now I have my pivot data on a separate tab to my raw data. And that in general is how I structure these things. I might want to also move it, so I think it probably works better if I have it next to my raw data. So raw data, then my pivot table, like so. What I then might want to do is I might want to create some kind of chart based on my pivot data. So again, I would make sure that I'm placing all of my charts on a different spreadsheet as well. And this kind of goes into more of like designing dashboards and things like that. Remember, these are just tips that I'm giving you. You don't have to abide by them. If you want to have your chart on the same page as your pivot table, that is fine. We're just really in this session discussing sort of how it's going to be easiest for people to read and update and interpret your data. So I'm going to create a very quick chart here. I'm just going to click on my pivot table data. I'm going to go to the Analyze ribbon and I'm going to select Pivot Chart. And we're going to do a very simple pie chart like so and click on OK. Like that. Now I could have it there if I wanted to. It's not a particularly crowded spreadsheet, that's fine. But what I tend to do is I like to move it onto a different spreadsheet as well. Again, you don't have to do this, but I'm going to create another spreadsheet and I'm going to call it, let's just call it sales charts, like so. And to keep things consistent, I'm going to give the tab color, make that orange, and I'm going to copy, or cut, shall I say, and place it over here like so. And obviously you'll make your spreadsheets, you'll give them nice titles, you'll name your charts, you'll make it look a whole lot better than I have here. But this is just really to give you the idea, that idea of layout and separating your data, okay? Just to keep everything, you don't want to be crowding your spreadsheets with lots of information. You want to keep things nice and separate. Lovely. All right. Now that we've got that idea of kind of structure and layout, let's look at something a little bit different. And this is a cool little trick which not many people tend to use. In fact, I'll ask you, does anybody here already use the advanced filter in Excel? Advanced filter? Anybody? No? Nick says no. Couple of people, yeah. Oh, there's quite a few people, yes. Probably about half and half, yes and no. Yeah, I find this really, really useful. When I sort of first started using it, I thought, oh, that's actually really, really helpful and really, really cool. And I'll show you how it works. If I just put it over here, just so it's easy for you to see. So let's take this column, for example, column H. So in column H, we have a list of manager names. So you can see here I've got Colin, then we move to Spencer, and then it goes down to Mabel. So I've got sort of about, I think, 10 or 12 managers listed in here. And what I want to do is I want to pull out just a list of the manager names. So you can see they're all repeated. So I've got probably about 100 Collins in here and then 100 Spencers. And all I want is just a list of the 12 manager names, okay? So instead of copying and pasting down here, because if I did that, I'm going to get this 100 times, I can use the advanced filter, which will just pull out one of each into a nice little list for me. So I always think this is quite a nice little option that not many people know about. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go to the data ribbon. And in our sort and filter group, next to the filter, which you might already be used to, there is a little advanced option just here. There's a few different things you can do with this. What we're going to do is we're going to select copy to another location. And then it says list range, and it's actually, because I was doing this earlier, it's already picked up my column. I'm just going to delete that out so you can see me actually do it. So my list range, I want to pull out the manager, so I'm going to select column H. And I don't need to enter a criteria range, I just need to enter where I want to copy it to. So I'm going to say copy to cell M4, and I want unique records only. And click on OK. And you can see there very quickly, it's just pulled out all of those manager names. And I could get rid of manager if I just wanted the names there. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this list. Now that I've got it, I'm going to cut it, so Control X to cut, and I'm going to create another tab, and I'm going to move this over here so it's on the end, and I'm going to call this tab Calcs, Calculations, and I'm going to paste it. Oops, I think it's because I renamed in between. Let's try that again. Control X, and Control V to paste. So I now have my names on a separate spreadsheet. And what I'm trying to illustrate to you here is I'm going to do a very quick calculation. So what I'm going to do is I want to know what the total sales are for each of the managers. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a formula based on this data. And again, I'm not doing it on the same spreadsheet just here because it makes it too complicated. So I would suggest that any calculations you're doing based on some data, you put on different spreadsheets again. So this is my calculations tab where I'm going to be doing various different things, okay? Again, it's all about that layout, separating your data. If I send this to someone, they can very easily look at it and say, okay, there's the raw data, there's the pivot table, there's the charts, there's my data for August, and these are the calculations based on that data, instead of everything being crammed into here, okay? So what we're going to do is for our calculations, we are going to do a sum if. So again, if you've never done this before, this is a nice little tip for you. Now, before I do this, I'm going to show you the importance of naming things, okay? Let's go back to our raw data. I'm going to name a couple of columns that I'm going to use in my calculations. So when I do a sum if, what I'm basically going to say is I'm going to say, it's going to say sum if it matches Colin Bateman. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my raw data and I'm going to select column H and I'm going to give this column a name. In fact, let's do Control Shift down to highlight just the column, not those blank rows at the top. And I'm going to name this column Manager. So in my name box at the side, I'm going to click in here and I'm going to call it Manager. Remember to press Enter. I'm going to do the same for sales. So I'm going to click, I'm going to do Control Shift down, and this is just naming ranges, okay? And I'm going to call this, let's say, sales, and Enter. And you'll see why this is useful. If I go back to my calculations now, if I want to do a sum if, which I'm going to do equals sum if, open bracket, it's now asking me for my range. Now I can press the F3 key and that will bring up all of my named ranges. So I can very quickly select, I think I want to select manager here, comma, and it says criteria. So I want it to match the name Colin Bateman to that manager column. And then I want it to do a sum. So again, I can do F3 and I want it to sum the sales. Okay, and close my bracket. Now, if you're confused by that formula, it's not really the formula that you need to take away from this little exercise. What you need to take away from this is the importance of naming things. So this has made it very simple for me to construct a formula. If I hadn't have named those columns, manager and sales, I would have to have selected the ranges. okay? And because they're on a different worksheet, I would have ended up with a formula that's very, very long, because it would say something along the lines of sum if, then it would be sheet 1, exclamation point, then the range, and then it would carry on with the formula. So it would be very, very long. So what I'm doing here by using named ranges is condensing it down. So the formula is very short and it's very easy for everybody to understand. So somebody who has limited knowledge can look at this and think, oh, okay, so it's referencing the manager column, cell A4, and the sales column. And it just makes it really easy for other people to use. Okay, I can then, because I've used named ranges, I don't need to make anything absolute because I'm using a range name, and I can just double click to copy that down. All right, so hopefully that gets that point across, as it's really good to just start naming things to make things a lot easier to read. Does that make sense to everybody so far? I know I'm hitting you with a lot of things. It's a real mishmash. It's Christmas. Wonderful. I think somebody asked, is this going to be recorded? Yes, it is. I've made sure 3 times that the recording is on. Wonderful. All right, let's move on. Okay, what's next on the list? Let's have a look. Yes, formatting. Now, if I jump across to this little page here, and again, this is something which is so simple, but people don't do. This is providing or naming your cells and using formatting to make your spreadsheet easier to understand. So again, very, very simple data. I just have some net values here. My VAT column is blank. I'm going to fill this in a moment. I have my VAT rate just here. And then above that, I have a little key, which tells anybody who's looking at this data what's going on in each of these cells. So you can see here, the key is saying that anything that's formatted like this is a heading. So here, warnings, I don't have any warnings as yet. I can see that anything formatted like this is an input cell. So this is where the value might change. And then if there's any calculations, I'm going to format them in that way. So let's do a little calculation. I'm going to do equals. We're going to do the net multiplied by the VAT rate. And I'm going to make that absolute because I'm going to copy it down and I don't want it to move anywhere. So I'm going to do F4 just to make that absolute and hit enter. And I can now safely double click to copy that down. So now this is a calculation cell. If I click in it, look in my formula bar, I can see I have a formula in there. I've performed a calculation. So I'm going to stipulate that using formatting. And I can see here, according to my key, any calculation cell I'm going to format like that. So I'm going to highlight, and Excel has on the home ribbon in this styles group some handy formatting that you can use. And again, you might have looked at this previously and thought, that's nice formatting, and not really kind of realized the potential of using these. Okay, so you can see here we have all of these different ones. So input cells, notes, warning text, output, you can really choose whatever you want. So I'm going to select calculation, and it's so tiny, I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. Like so. So again, now anybody looking at this spreadsheet can see, okay, these are calculation cells, okay? So don't be afraid to add a little bit of a key or a legend or something at the top which explains what each of these cells are, okay? Another thing which I like to do at this stage is protect cells as well. So this is a fantastic one. If you are somebody who has created a beautiful spreadsheet and you're going to send it to somebody and you think, oh God, I really hope she or he doesn't mess up my spreadsheet, you can lock down cells so that people can only enter data into certain cells. So for example, I might not want anybody to be able to to edit these cells down here, but I might want them to be able to edit the VAT rate, okay? I just don't want them touching these formulas, okay? So I want people to be able to come in here, and if the VAT rate has changed, change that and have it update down here, but I don't want them to actually be able to double click on this cell and start messing around with my beautiful formulas that have taken so long to construct, Okay, so how do we do that? And I love to show people this because I always think that locking cells, it works so backward in your mind. It's very odd the way that this kind of works, but the way that you need to get it into your head is that by default, and this will make no sense at all, by default, every cell in Excel is locked, okay? By default. Now you might be thinking, well, how is every cell locked? Because I can come into any cell and I can type. The locking doesn't take effect until you protect the spreadsheet. So on the review ribbon, you have this protect workbook or protect sheet. So if I was to click protect sheets, I'm not going to be able to click on anything. And that's because by default, as soon as you protect the sheet, all of the cells become locked, okay? So if you want to, it kind of works in reverse. So what I want to do, first of all, is unlock the cells that I want people to be able to edit. As I said, you kind of have to get your mind around it a little bit. So I want people to be able to edit this cell only, okay? So cell B7. So I'm going to click it, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go down to format cells. And you'll see we have a protection tab on the end. And look at that. By default, it's locked, and you'll find this on any cell you click on. If you come into protection, it will say locked. It's just the locking doesn't activate until you protect the worksheet, okay? But by default, it will always have a tick in locked. So what you want to do is take the tick out and click on OK. So now if I go to protect sheets, and I'm going to just add a quick password and click on OK, re-enter it and click on OK. What you'll find is that if I try and edit one of these cells down here, so if I try and edit the formula, it's not going to let me, okay? So I can't change that, but I can go to the VAT cell and change that to 30%. And when I hit enter, all of my totals will update. So pretty much I can edit only this cell in this worksheet. And you could do that if there's sort of quite a few cells. You can hold down your control key and, you know, select whichever cells you want to have people edit and then lock everything else. So that's a really great way of being able to maintain the integrity of your spreadsheets by locking the cells that you don't want people to edit. All right, just remember it works a little bit backwards. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, excellent. Makes things a lot easier. Yeah, it does. Wonderful. Great. Okay, good. I'm glad you're all still with me. Right, I'm quickly just going to unprotect this sheet, so just bear with me. Because I will, if I don't do it now, I have a memory like a sieve and I'll forget the password. So, so I'd quickly do that. All right, along this same vein, let's jump across to this summary tab. And again, this is what I was mentioning at the beginning about having a welcome sheet. And this is something which I feel should be kind of fairly standard when you're creating spreadsheets now, particularly if you're sharing spreadsheets. And that is just providing a welcome sheet or a summary sheet at the beginning, telling people how to use this spreadsheet. There is no shame in having an explainer at the beginning, okay? So again, this is just an example one. I'm sure you'll make yours a lot better than this, but this is really just a how to use this spreadsheet and, you know, just telling people what to do, copy and paste figures from here to here, refresh your pivot tables, you know, just a little bit of guidance. It also contains that key so people know what the key means and also some advice on saving. So again, if you have a spreadsheet, don't be afraid to have that summary sheet with instructions for whoever's going to be using that. So think about doing that as well. Lovely. All right, let's take a look at auditing errors. And what do I want to do for this? Let's go across to here. Yeah, and to make this a bit easier, I'm just going to take this column here. I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to put it back on over here, just so to make this a little bit easier for you to see. So I've just taken my little manager names, which I had before, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another little formula here, and just to switch things up a bit, instead of doing a sum if, we're going to do an average if this time. So I'm going to work out the average sales for each manager. And if you remember previously, we named our columns. So column H, we named manager, and column K, we named sales. So we're not going to have to mess around with any cell references, making them absolute, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to type in equals, average, if, open brackets. So again, I'm going to press the F3 key on my keyboard, and I'm going to select my range name. This is just so much easier than just selecting the range yourself. It's just to have them set up as range names. So we're going to do manager, comma, and then my criteria again is Colin, comma, and then I'm going to press F3 again, and it's my sales data that we're trying to find the average of, and close brackets. Again, don't worry about the formula too much. It's really just this whole process of naming things. And I'm going to double click to copy down, like so. And let's do just a quick heading, average of sales. Okay, now why am I doing this? It's not really to show you the formula. What I want to show you is just a little bit of formula auditing, and this is something which you can do on all of your spreadsheets, and this is another way to maintain the integrity of your spreadsheets. Formulas can get messed up very easily, particularly if you have people working in that spreadsheet who maybe don't really know what they're doing with formulas. It doesn't take much. You're just like clicking away, and then all of a sudden you've added a comma into a formula, and you've broken multiple things across multiple spreadsheets because everything is linked to everything else. Okay, so you need to be aware of how to use formula auditing tools, so that if you do come across a spreadsheet which has some errors in it, how you can find out or work out which cells that particular formula is referring to. So let's just click on this first one here, so cell N5. And on the formulas ribbon, you have a formula auditing group, okay? And I'm going to click trace precedence. And what you'll see is it puts some arrows on the screen, and it will tell you what is making up that formula. So it's got arrows which are coming from manager and the sales column. So I know that this formula is doing the average of the manager and the sales column. If I had a really weird number in here and I thought, well, that doesn't fit with everything else is in there, it might be when I click on trace precedence that it's referring to the wrong column. Maybe I've accidentally selected the I don't know, the state column or something like that if I've got a weird error. All right, so this is a great way of being able to tell where your formulas are coming from. You can click remove arrows as well. You can do it in reverse by tracing dependents also. So I don't think that will work on this cell. No, let's do it on the one that it's referring to. So if I go to sales and do trace dependents, you can see that all of these formulas here rely on the information in this sales column, okay? So you can do the reverse essentially and remove arrows. So knowing what these formula auditing tools do is really, really helpful. There's a few others in here which I would advise you having a little look at. Again, you can help, they give you help on error checking and evaluating formulas. So if you're having any problems with a formula and you want to kind of try and pinpoint where the error is, I would highly recommend that you look into using evaluate formula and error checking as well. I don't think we've got time to cover those in this session, but just be aware of where they are. Lovely. All right, now I'm going to delete these out, like so. And another reason why I would recommend putting things in a table, and again, this just makes everything easy to update. So if I come to the bottom of my table just here, as I said at the beginning, flexibility with your data is very important. Our data is never static. So I've got sales data here, which runs up until the 1st of the 7th, 2017. Now, I've also got a sheet here that has sales data for August. So this is basically the next month of sales data, which I want to incorporate into my data here. And any pivot tables or charts that I have based on this data, I want them to update. Now, if I hadn't have put my data in a table, this is going to be pretty difficult. What I would do is I would copy the data across, and then I would have to go in and I would have to recreate the pivot table by selecting the new range with the updated data. It's a lot of steps, and I don't want to do that because I'm lazy. I like to do things the quickest way possible. Because I have my data in a table, let me show you what happens when you add in new data. So I'm going to come to the August figures. I'm going to click in them, and I'm going to do Control A to highlight the whole lot. And I'm going to do Control C to copy. I'm going to come back to my raw data. I'm going to click just underneath and do Control V to paste. And what you'll see is it becomes part of that table. Now I'm just going to take out the header row because I don't want that. But it's now become part of that table range. So it means all I have to do is click one button to refresh my pivot tables and charts. Excuse me. So if I go to my sales pivot and click in here, on the Analyze ribbon, I have a refresh button. And all I need to do is click refresh, and it will update all of my figures. Same thing with my charts. If I click here, Analyze, refresh, and it might have already refreshed actually when I did my pivot table. I think it did. So hopefully you saw those numbers change when I clicked refresh, but that's all I need to do. I just need to click one button. I don't have to go in and reselect the data, recreate pivot tables. And that is all because I put my data in a table and it automatically expands to accommodate any new data. This is the most efficient way of managing your data in Excel. I love tables and their auto expansion qualities. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. There is one final thing I want to show you, and then I want to give you a couple of little links right at the end of the session. Another good way of maintaining the integrity of your spreadsheet is to utilize data validation. Has anybody used data validation to any great extent? Type into the chat panel if you have. Data validation. Laurie says no. Got a few yeses in there. Yes, Jessica, I love it too. I really love data validation. There are so many ways that you can use it, and I really do. I use it fairly frequently, but it's a great way of being able to control the information that's coming into your spreadsheet. And again, you know, if you're someone like me who hates giving over their spreadsheets because you're worried that someone's going to mess it up, then this is a great way of controlling exactly what they can enter into a spreadsheet. I love using data validation and protecting cells, so I can really just kind of control, like they're very limited to what people can enter in, which limits the amount of errors. Excuse me, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat at the moment. All right, let me show you a couple of ways of using data validation. So let's use it on a date range first of all. So in column A, I have a whole bunch of dates which start from the 1st of the 1st, 2016. And if I do a control down arrow to take me to the bottom, it ends at the 1st of the 8th, 2017. So maybe I only want data that can be entered between these two dates. So what I'm going to do is, if I scroll back up to the top, I'm going to go to the data ribbon and I'm going to select data validation. And in this settings area, I'm going to say allow, and if I click the drop down, there are so many different options you have in here, but this particular example, I'm working with dates. So I'm going to select dates, and I'm going to say allow data between, and then I'm going to give the start date. So I'm going to say the 1st of the 1st, 2016. I can't remember what that end date was. Let's have a little look. Oops. 1st of the 8th, 2017. Oops. I think I just got rid of my data validation. Let me do that again. Yes, I did. Let's do it again. So 1st of the 1st, 2016, and the 1st of the 1st, 2018. Now, so I'm going to say only allow data to be input between these two dates. So if somebody tries to enter in something for the 1st of the 1st, 2019, they're going to be told they can't do it. And you can do that by establishing an input message or an error alert, or you could do both if you wanted to. So input message, you could have this, so when they hover over the cell, it tells them what they need to type in. So I might put something like help, or actually let's put info, sounds a bit better. Enter dates between the 1st of the 1st, 2016 and the 1st of the 1st, 2018. And then I might want it to have an error. So if they enter anything outside of that date range, I might want it to say, warning, please enter in, and then you could put the dates in again. I'm just going to put correct dates for quickness sake. Okay, and I'm going to click on okay, like so. All right, so I think I should have highlighted my entire column. I think it's, yeah, sorry. I should have highlighted the entire column before I did that. So currently it's only applied to here, but let's just use this as an example. So you can see as I hover over, it says enter dates between the 1st, 2016 and 2018. So it gives people an idea of what they need to be doing. So if I try to go in here and enter in some weird random dates, so let's do the 15th of the 8th, 2019, and hit enter, it's going to say please enter in correct dates. Okay, so you can use it as a little warning, you can use it as help text on any cells you want. So currently I've only got it applied to one. I should have highlighted the entire column before I went into data validation, so just remember that as a little check. So that's a great way of using data validation. Another way that I like to use it is, again, if I'm doing some kind of you know, like a form or something along those lines where I want very specific data entered in. So if we take our, let's use this list again, the manager list. I might want to have, if I've got a form, I might want to have these names in a drop-down list so people can come in and just click on the drop-down and select a name to input in the cell. So I know that they're not typing in the name incorrectly, there's no spelling mistakes. Again, it's just a way of controlling what you're putting into your spreadsheet. So we use data validation for that as well. So let's go back to data validation. And this time we're going to select list. And my source is this just here, and I'm going to say okay, and what I get is a little drop down which then gives me all of those names in a list. So again, I'm controlling what can be entered into a cell, maintaining the integrity of that spreadsheet. There's so much cool stuff in data validation. I would recommend you have a little Google of that if you are interested, or you've been kind of excited by those examples that you've seen, because there's so much that you can do with it. All right, whew. I think, yeah, we've got about 4 minutes left. So hopefully that's given you a few tips and tricks for things that you can think about when you're designing your spreadsheet. There are so many different things. And one little website that I want to show you is Filtered, who I work for, actually worked with the ICAEW, which are an accountancy. They look after accountants basically, and we put together a document on exactly this topic, which is how to design better spreadsheets. So I'll just go to their website so you can because if you want to, you can download just here the 20 principles of good spreadsheet practice. So if I just put the, that's free for anybody to download. So if I just put it into the chat panel, if you want to, if I do Control V, there you go. If you want to download that, you can. That's just a little bit further information. It covers a lot of the points which I've spoke about today, but that's always a nice document to have a little read of. Lovely. Okay, let me jump back because I can take a couple of questions before I let you all go. I will try and do as many as I can in this chat panel. If not, I will give you my email address at the end. Does anybody have any questions if you want to type them into the chat panel? Oh, someone's put something in the Q&A, just bear with me. Linda has put protect sheet. Is that just the sheet and not every sheet tab within the file? That is correct. So if you do protect sheet, that's just the sheet. There is an option next to it for protect workbook, which will protect the whole thing. Let's have a look. So Rich has put, when you demonstrated adding the August data to the existing table, did you copy and paste the August data into existing data table? Yes, I did. So it was just a straight copy and paste that I did at the bottom. Yeah. Lovely. Someone is asking, what version of Excel are you using? I'm actually using, I've just upgraded to 2019. It is Office 365/2019, so it's the latest version. Yes. Let's have a look. Do you cut and insert /paste rather than making a new column first? Hilary, it doesn't really matter. It's just however you prefer to do it. You can do cut and then insert cut cells, which I sometimes do, or some you can create a new column first and then paste in. Entirely up to you. Both ways are good. Mary had a great question. Will it work if the calculations are on another tab? Yes, it will. It will refer to the sheet. The sheet will be included in the formula. Yeah. Do presidents and dependents work across sheets? Yes, they do. What will happen is if the formula that you're tracing the president or dependent on is on another sheet, it will show like a little square sheet icon, which means that your data is on a different sheet, and you can double click on it. Let's have a look. Someone has put, I'm not sure, Nick, if you've put this is a complaint or a compliment. I'm not sure. I'm not English speaking by birth, I'm Dutch, but this was easy to follow. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. That's kind of you to say. Someone else has put, are the videos now available on YouTube? Paul, yes, they pretty much are. We're still doing just a little bit of, it's actually my fault that they're not completely finished at the moment. We're just doing the thumbnails, but yes, they're pretty much on there already. Next, on the new year, I will be giving out the link to YouTube once they're all pretty and ready to go. When will a copy of this session be available for review? So I get this question all the time. So it's sent out automatically. So the recording and the practice files, and I'll send you the spreadsheet that I've been working on and the presentation if you want. These get sent out automatically 24 hours after the webinar ends. So this time tomorrow, you should receive an email from us with the links to the files and the recording. If you don't get it after the 24 hours, I would suggest that you check your spam, clutter, junk folders. If you've ever put any of our emails into spam, junk, or clutter, sometimes your email system will just move things into there automatically. So please check that it hasn't gone into there. If you still don't have it, let me know, and I can send it to you. And while we're on that subject, because I think the questions are kind of coming to a close now, I just want to say a big Merry Christmas from everyone at Filtered and Excel with Business. And as I said, that is my email address at the bottom. So I'm happy to take any questions you have about this webinar, provided they're not too long. I do get people send me big long pages of these complicated things they want me to do, and unfortunately I'm not really a help desk. if it's a quick short answer, then that's absolutely fine. But yes, but if you have any questions particularly related to this webinar, or if you didn't get the recording, please feel free to send me a quick email at deborah.ashby@filtered.com. So all that remains to be said is have a wonderful Christmas, everyone, and I will speak to you on the 9th, I think it is, January the 9th. So please sign up, check the website for the webinars that we're running next year, and I can't wait to speak to you all. Have a safe holidays, everyone. Speak to you next year. Bye-bye.